tragic.
Sad.
Devastation.
Victimized.
Traumatized.
Unfortunate.
Debilitating.
Pain. Heartbreaking.
Real.
And this is not a subject, that people want to talk about. It just isn't.
This is something that happens to people that nobody ever wants to talk about. Don't sugarcoat it.
He was 5 years older than me. So when I was 6, he was 11. And that relationship with John continued till I was about 9. My brother's best friend, he was a Boy Scout with my brother. And my mom would drop me off at John's house because John's dad was also our scoutmaster. So my brother and John are there. I go inside the house. John takes me upstairs and molests me on a red bean bag with my brother downstairs. And later on it turns out that his father had been doing that to him, the scoutmaster.
Sometimes it's not the stranger in the park. It can be in their home. It can be the coach. It can be a teacher. It can be anyone that they may come in contact with. And the saddest thing, I think a lot of times, are the children who are abused by the people that are supposed to love them the most.
So my daughter came home one day from a visitation with her dad and asked me a strange, unsettling question. She said, Mom, can you get pregnant from family members? I had this sinking feeling that meant that her father had done something. But at that point, I wanted to be a little bit in denial.
We tend not to think that those things could happen in our family. Sometimes they're passed on from generation to generation.
If you go back and read case studies of these types of situations, you hear frequently that the abuser says that they were abused.
%100 of my suspects have had something happen to them as a child or a young person.
It affects some of the basic beliefs the person has about themselves.
There's always going to be trust issues. They could experience have a lot of violent tendencies. There are just a lot of these kids who are struggling may have been a victim of abuse and they never got help.
I believe the ones that don't receive the treatment either turn to drugs or alcohol, or what I have seen get into unhealthy relationships or practice addictive-like behavior.
Not only does the child need that help, that therapy, that counseling, but anybody that's affected, everybody in that family needs that therapy and that counseling, that help.
It's a dynamic through the whole family.
The family can be either very supportive and helpful, or they can really intensify the problems that are coming from that.
Once our daughter brought it to our attention, I was really deeply hurt. I was very upset. I was very frustrated because of what was destroyed.
have seen a difference in my grandparents. I used to be completely afraid of them, not knowing if they were going to yell at me or hit me or whatever.
Oftentimes where I see that they struggle the most is with the system not believing them, their parents not believing them.
And that is such a travesty, just imagining that children are in that place where somebody they trust, because it's 90% of the time, somebody they trust has molested them or abused them in some way. And then the rest of the people that they trust don't believe them, and they have nowhere to go.
It takes away from you psychologically, it takes away from you emotionally, it takes away from you physically. It leaves you in a place that you are so lost within yourself. There is no safe place for you to be.
What you're talking about is a human being who happens to be, let's say, 6 years old, that has a life expectancy of 82 years, let's say. And you're talking about effects on an entire lifetime.
It is like they have lost a part of their soul.
Sometimes the bully is the person being hurt, and I know what it feels like.
Children that have had that ripped from them go through school and their learning process with that feeling. They may not even be able to succeed at school because they just don't feel like they're good enough at anything. There's something bad about them. So there's such a powerful effect of sexual assault on an individual's self-esteem that it can't help but have a huge effect on their mental health and through life.
When a child has gone through abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, they can become socially inept, which can make them more of a target for bullying. Or sometimes, in order to start trying to gain some control, they become the bully.
And what we found through speaking with a lot of counselors in the school, law enforcement, and school administrators, parents, and students, what we're seeing is what's happening in the homes as far as child abuse, substance abuse, and domestic violence is spilling over into our schools.
It affects drastically a large amount of people. If you have awareness and then you have an idea of the scope of how it potentially can affect the community, then you might be motivated to participate and try to do something to solve the problem, or at least help the problem.
It is very, very difficult. It's difficult to go to an attorney, and I think it's even more difficult to speak to law enforcement, and I think it's very difficult to speak to the DA. And of course, once you go through all those channels, if you're lucky enough to get to that point, because I say lucky because it's very hard to prosecute these cases. It's almost impossible. There's no physical evidence. They're not going to take that case. There's no witness. How many times will you find a witness to something like that? They're not going to take the case. It's one of the hardest crimes to prosecute.
One of the challenges we have oftentimes would be with the victims of sexual assault and sexual abuse. Sometimes there's delayed reporting for obvious reasons. They're going through the stress and going through a traumatic experience, and they don't immediately report. Oftentimes in these cases you have no physical evidence, you simply have what one person has said.
If I show up to the hospital and it's an adult, a lot of times there might have been days that have gone by before they finally have mustered up enough courage.
The investigation can be just as bad as what happened to them. Sometimes children come into the emergency room and it's on something that the child said, that someone touched them at school, or that they had been in the bathroom at school and somebody else came in with them, and that's kind of more hearsay-ish, and those children don't have a lot of outward bodily signs. So then a sane nurse in the hospital or a physician in the hospital will come in, interview the parents, interview the family, and they'll do a series of tests on the child, which includes hair samples from different areas of the body, and they'll look over the entire body to see if there's any signs of abuse.
Our challenges for smaller children is, just being able to get the story. And if there's no physical evidence, we just don't have anything.
Jurors expect to see some type of physical evidence, and in these cases, oftentimes, there is no physical evidence.
The fact is that it happens everywhere. And I know, unfortunately, from doing this job, that it exists right here in our community. So that's the first primary thing to do, is to raise awareness.
And start having these conversations, telling children how to tell us, talking to them about not keeping secrets, talk to them about what is so special about their bodies and that people should not touch you where your bathing suit is. Talking to them so that when something happens, and having a relationship with a child, that they're not afraid to come to you when something's bothering them.
One of the most powerful things is just the ability to be in the presence of someone who will not judge and listen to their story.
Promise Place gave me the tools I needed to grow.
We really try and provide each person the opportunity to survive and move forward by giving them a voice.
Everybody needs a safe place to go after something happens.
Promise Place is a huge part of our community.
One of the biggest problems we have in this community and throughout our state is that we do not have adequate resources to support crime victims in general, and more particularly crime victims who are the victims of sexual assault and sexual abuse. That's why we're so fortunate here to have an organization such as Promise Place, because they fill that void and provide assistance with victims and their families, and giving them the support and the guidance that they need during this very traumatic experience.
This has been so much a part of the tapestry of our society.
We're all vulnerable.
It has a huge ripple effect on the community forever.
When you take the secrecy out and kids no longer feel like they can't tell because they've been threatened, then you have opened that door.
I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for David Shannon in Boston, who was my therapist there. He had been the first person in my entire life when I started therapy with him that asked me the question, what happened?
We can be that quiet voice that's there for them.
The more community awareness you have, potentially leads to better outcomes. So there's no question that community involvement and the awareness by the community of the problem is vital.
How many lives have been changed because of this? It's astoundingly stupid.
That door is wide open for these kids to get the help they need. Because without the help, they will struggle. But with the help, they can overcome it.